Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into something that's really captured imaginations for, well, centuries, and it feels like it's picking up steam now. Predictions and prophecies about the year 2025.
Mm,
Various bits of information floating around suggest it could be a year of, pretty significant global shifts.
right.
So our goal here really is to try and unpack some of these different views, get a handle on the main worries they reflect, and maybe pinpoint areas to watch without getting totally carried away, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's striking is just how broad these projections are. I mean, you see, talk about potential major conflicts,
Yeah.
the appearance of some really significant figure, major environmental stuff, economic changes, big leaps in tech.
Right, even the royals.
Yeah, even shifts within, say, the British royal family. It's quite a mix of possibilities being discussed.
And it's almost impossible to talk prophecy without bringing up Nostradamus, right? His writings go way back centuries, but they have this weird knack for seeming to line up with huge historical
Oh,
events.
absolutely.
Like, take the Great Fire of London, 1666. Some interpretations of his verses talk about a city burning right around the time there's this sort of symbolic fall of royalty. It's pretty striking when you put them side by side.
It really is. And then fast forward, and the 20th century seems to provide more, frankly, chilling connections.
Hmm.
This idea that his words about two eagles locked in battle,
Hmm.
blood staining the sky, could point to the world wars. That's powerful,
Yeah.
especially given the eagle symbol used by nations involved.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the rise of Adolf Hitler, the unbelievable destruction. Many see him as potentially foreshadowed in Nostradamus' earlier writings about an Antichrist figure.
Those historical echoes, they definitely make you stop and think. And, after Queen Elizabeth II passed away in 2022.
Right, there was a huge spike in interest.
Exactly. A real resurgence in looking at Nostradamus, especially drawing on work by people like Mario Redding, who'd even sort of hinted at a time frame for her passing.
Yeah, I remember that.
So now, looking at 2025, some readings of his work hint at possible social collapse, major climate disruption, and maybe the rise of some very powerful global figures. It's that theme again, history kind of echoing or maybe rhyming.
And one thing that's always there, always in the background of human history, is the fear of big wars, global conflict.
True.
That possibility has just always been there. So when we look at interpretations of Nostradamus for 2025, there's one prophecy that mentions a red enemy turning pale with fear while the ocean roars.
Okay.
And nowadays, people often connect that red enemy with China. A cultural link with red, plus its growing military footprint, especially in places like the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait.
That definitely lines up with what's happening now, the geopolitical tensions. These aren't just vague fears. You actually see increased military drills, diplomatic standoffs.
Right.
The whole situation feels, well, delicate. Like a small mistake could just snowball.
Yeah, it feels very high stakes. And it's interesting, this worry about huge conflict, it's not just Nostradamus. You find echoes in, say, the Book of Revelation.
Hmm.
There's that figure, the rider on the red horse, symbolizing war and kind of moral breakdown.
That connection to religious or spiritual texts is interesting, too.
It is significant. For some people, current world events really seem to mirror these ancient prophecies about a time of great upheaval, where truth gets murky.
Yeah.
But regardless of what you personally believe, you can feel a kind of general unease about where things are heading globally.
Speaking of unease, let's shift to another pretty unsettling idea. This concept of a third Antichrist.
Ah, yes.
Across different spiritual traditions, you find this idea of a really dark, manipulative force. In Christianity, it's the Antichrist figure, and Nostradamus, as we said, is often read as predicting three such figures. Napoleon and Hitler are usually pegged as the first two.
Right. And what makes this predicted third one especially, disturbing, according to these readings, are the traits they supposedly have. Not necessarily overt force like the others, maybe, but someone described as like a brilliant speaker, incredibly wealthy, super smart, very charming, persuasive,
Right.
someone capable of massive deception, gaining power globally, maybe not through armies, but through, I don't know, clever talk and manipulating information.
Wow. That does make you think. Could someone like that be rising now? Maybe even someone we already see but don't recognize for what they are.
It raises a big question, doesn't it? Would society even spot such a person? This idea that we can become blind to evil. It's powerful. How easily truth can get twisted or just traded for comfort, for feeling safe.
Yeah, there's that passage, I think, in Thessalonians about a man of lawlessness appearing, but deceptively.
Exactly, 2 Thessalonians 2.3. And that really just highlights how important it is to be discerning, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, grounding ourselves in facts, trying to think critically, being willing to question things, even if they look good on the surface. Basically, stay alert. Don't just get swept away by charisma or what's popular.
Good point. Okay, let's pivot a bit towards the environment. Nostradamus apparently had some pretty bleak predictions there, too.
He did. There's this prophecy about a great wave bringing famine and death. And today, I mean, it's hard not to connect that with rising sea levels, farmland becoming unusable, all these extreme weather events we keep seeing.
Yeah, it feels very current.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing real-world examples. You hear about crop failures in parts of Africa, more coastal flooding.
Yeah.
It's not isolated incidents anymore. It feels like part of a bigger pattern of planetary stress. Nostradamus also mentioned a huge earthquake. And that recent one in Myanmar, while awful for everyone there, sometimes gets pulled into these interpretations as maybe a sign, a precursor to bigger geological shifts.
And wasn't it just Nostradamus? I think another predictor, Baba Vanga, also hinted at major upheavals around 2025.
That's right, she did. And when you have different sources, different time periods, kind of pointing towards similar potential issues, it makes you pause, makes you wonder if there's some underlying message. Almost like, as some say, nature itself is trying to tell us something through these events.
Yeah. It reminds me of that line in Romans about creation groaning.
Romans 8.22, yeah. Groaning as in the pains of childbirth. It's a potent image, isn't it? A world in transformation. And maybe these environmental crises are part of that. It certainly makes you want to pay closer attention. Think about our own role in all this.
Okay, now turning to the economy. There's a prediction, I think linked to Bob Vanga again, about a major economic collapse in 2025.
Yes, that's one of hers.
And that certainly hits a nerve right now, doesn't it? With all the talk about inflation, rising interest rates, massive national debt, those worries are very real for a lot of people.
They absolutely are. And her prediction also suggested a potential power shift, away from the West dominating more towards the East, highlighting countries like China and India gaining more influence. It kind of suggests that maybe pure financial muscle might not be the only thing that matters going forward. Maybe things like cultural identity, being technologically adaptable, making smart alliances, maybe those become more important on the world stage.
You can definitely see some of that playing out already with, say, the war in Ukraine, ongoing trade tensions. It does feel like the old economic order is being shaken up.
It does. It makes you think about being prepared, personally, financially, sure, but also just being adaptable, maybe having some spiritual resilience, too, to face potential big changes.
But interestingly, it's not all dire warnings, right? Amidst all this potential disruption, there's also a glimmer of hope, particularly in some predictions about medicine and tech for 2025.
That's true, yes. Baba Vanga, again, actually.
Yeah.
Talk of breakthrough treatments for things like cancer and Alzheimer's, which would be, absolutely life-changing for millions.
That would be incredible. A welcome contrast. And there have been some reports, haven't there, about progress on things like cancer vaccines. Some people point to developments in Russia as maybe an early sign of that prophecy starting to unfold.
Possibly. And then she also apparently predicted a big surge in tech evolution, specifically things like AI and quantum computing taking huge leaps forward.
Okay, so potentially amazing tools.
Potentially. But the big question with AI, quantum computing, all that powerful stuff, is always the ethics, isn't it? How do we use them? For healing, for connecting people? Or could they be used to divide, to control?
Right.
The future there really isn't set in stone. It depends on the choices we make consciously as these technologies roll out.
Okay, one last area, and this one might grab some headlines. The British monarchy.
Ah, yes. Always fascinating.
There's an interpretation of, I think, Nostradamus, again, suggesting a king being somehow forced out, cast down by an outside force, maybe not literally, and replaced by someone who doesn't have the traditional mark of kingship.
And given King Charles's recent cancer diagnosis.
Exactly. That prediction suddenly got a lot more attention, sparking all sorts of speculation.
And there's that specific interpretation, the one from Aria Rating we mentioned earlier, that points towards Prince Harry.
How does that work?
Well, the idea, the paradox, is that by stepping back from royal duties, by removing himself from the direct line in the public eye, he might inadvertently become the one without the mark. It's his lack of the traditional role that fulfills the prophecy in that reading.
Huh. That's a fascinating twist, isn't it? Kind of counterintuitive. The one who seems furthest away could be the unexpected successor.
It definitely underscores how, fragile power can be, how change is always present, even in institutions that seem so permanent. And look, there have always been opinions, criticisms aimed at King Charles and Queen Camilla. That's nothing new. But it perhaps adds to this sense of potential change.
Yeah, feeling of flux.
Ultimately, these royal prophecies, like all the ones we've touched on, just remind us that nothing stays the same forever. No system is totally immune to change. Maybe the real point isn't about predicting the future perfectly,
Right.
but more about getting ourselves ready for the fact that the future is always uncertain.
So, wrapping this up, looking back at all these projections for 2025, it's clear that whether they turn out to be spot on or way off base, they really do tap into genuine global worries. And hopes, too.
They're like a mirror, reflecting our anxieties about war, the planet, the economy, even old institutions.
And I think the key thing to hold on to, as you said, is that the future isn't just some script already written.
Not at all. It's being shaped right now by how aware we are, the choices we make, what we actually do. These prophecies, maybe they're best seen as a nudge, a prompt to pay more attention to what's going on around us.
Yeah, and think carefully.
And think critically about the direction we're all heading in.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, maybe think about some of these themes. How do they sit with your own view of the world? And maybe the biggest question, what part will you play in navigating whatever uncertainties are coming our way?